This is Ron Peters.
I'm John Nugent.
And I'm Sam Long.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
after class. Welcome back to another episode of the After Class Podcast. John's laughing already. This is not going well for us.
Yeah, we're off to a really good start.
There's a little bit of slap happiness in the room this afternoon. That's okay.
We had to delay hitting the record button because we just couldn't stop laughing. And
okay,
carrying that on.
Let's get this show on the road. I'm going to be the mother for a second.
You are a mother, aren't you?
Okay. So there have been a lot of things happening in the After Class podcast world, and we just want to bring you up to date with that before we get too much into our topic for today. The first is T-shirts.
Woohoo! T-shirts.
Of course, by the time you hear this, you will have missed your opportunity. But we do have T-shirts that are available. Some are going to be around here if you haven't quite gotten to the order link in time. And we're hoping to set up an automated shop in the future. So if you missed your chance, be on the lookout for that opportunity coming up. They are fantastic, delightfully designed, and very comfortable.
Yeah, if you haven't seen the picture, go to the Facebook page. You can see a photo of them there. And once again, thanks to our art director, Elijah
Cott.
Yeah, for coming up with this. It just keeps paying dividends. So shout out to Elijah.
Yeah, they're a mere $15, so that's a pretty good price for a T-shirt these days.
I think so.
Back in my day.
Back in your day.
That's Ron. He's the old guy.
I'm the old guy. In addition to that, another really cool thing that's just come about is that the After Class podcast will now have a monthly column in the Christian Standard magazine. And in fact, our first one is going to be in there this December, written by our own John Nugent. And going forward, we're going to be producing a monthly column called Biblically Correct. I wanted to make sure I got that out correctly. So it's supposed to be a humorous, somewhat edgy. We'll see how far over the edge or close to the edge we can go on that, but definitely is meant to be satirical and humorous in nature.
We'll also see how funny it actually is, but that's
that's for others to judge.
Remains to be seen.
That's right. So look for that in the upcoming Christian Standard by the time this episode is released.
It'll still be a while before it probably hits the air.
Yeah,
yeah, right. For sure.
Yeah,
December, sometime in December.
Right. Yeah, I don't know when the issue actually comes out, but hopefully soon. So anyway, some really cool stuff's happening for us, and we're really excited about that. On that note, I'm going to pass it over to John to lead us into today's topic, our conversation.
Yeah, so we're continuing our series, just kind of working through the topics of my book, Endangered Gospel. And the book starts out by exploring different views of a better place that Christians have had. We've talked about the heaven-centered view, the human-centered view, and the world-centered view. And we found each of these views has certain strengths to it, and they also have certain weaknesses to them. And if you want to know what those are, well, just listen to the past few episodes. But now we're going to pivot toward a kingdom-centered view that we think is a little more inclusive of the Bible's vision of a better place, and really the center of the gospel. But to understand the kingdom-centered view, we don't want to just list its attributes. We want to situate it within the Bible story.
Yeah.
And that's what the book does. Part 2 of the book kind of walks through the Bible story from creation to the second coming of Jesus, and pays attention to what is the role of God's people in the Bible story. What is God holding them responsible for? Where does our responsibility begin and end? And that's really the difference between the human-centered view, the world-centered view, and the kingdom-centered view is what is the role of God's people?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a telling of the Bible story with a focus on ecclesiology, the nature and mission of the church. And in this week's episode, we're going to begin at the beginning of the story in Genesis. And the reason why we retell the Bible story is there's so many different ways the Bible story is told.
Yeah. Or not told.
Or not told, yeah. So I think we want to first kick around some of the more popular ways of telling the Bible story that fall short. Who wants to lead with one?
The standard, right? Creation, fall, redemption. Is that the 3 words? So God created this world, and humans screwed it up, but thankfully Jesus swooped in and saved the day and allows us to have something better to look forward to, depending upon your worldview. If it's heaven, it's going to heaven or whatever else. So that's typically what you hear in a lot of churches. Is the story that's put out there. And hopefully you see an obvious problem with that.
Exactly.
That moves directly from Genesis 3 to the New Testament.
Probably Romans.
And that skips, 95% of the Bible.
Right. Yeah.
And while we don't want to minimize Jesus, and
of course not.
I've been accused of that from time to time, since I do push the Old Testament so hard. But we don't want to minimize the importance of Jesus. But there's a lot that's in between there that is often overlooked by people,
Like Israel,
like
Exactly.
Israel.
Yeah.
Abraham, Moses, Torah.
Right. Yeah, I think that in Protestant evangelicalism, there has been a real problem in the fact that the entire history of Israel plays virtually no role in our understanding of the work of Jesus and the work of the church. That for whatever reason, that's just skipped over. And so people, as I jokingly said, but only half jokingly said, they'll read the first 3 chapters of Genesis and then immediately skip ahead. And for some, they even skip right over Jesus. They skip perhaps to the crucifixion and resurrection at best, but a lot of people will skip even over that to Paul. Like, nobody preached the gospel until Paul. And people have actually said that Jesus didn't preach the gospel. There was no gospel until you get to Paul, which is theologically one of the scariest things that I think a person can say. And back when we were responding to Andy Stanley, we talked about this Marcionism, this sort of inherent Marcionism that reflects. When you skip over the Old Testament and the history of Israel, you're doing something that a heretic tried to do. And we're not accusing people of heresy per se, although, John, I think that you guys might have been a little bit more bold on that than I was. I'm not
Fair enough.
pulling out the word heretic, but I'm saying it's so close it makes me scared. So yeah, to skip over the history of Israel is to skip over the work of God, and we do that at our own risk.
Yeah, and this isn't just a straw man, the notion of people skipping over the Old Testament in their telling of the Bible story. My wife and I and our friends, the Richards, went to Kentucky this past weekend and visited the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum just to see what's going on there.
Yeah.
I hear students bring it up enough in class where I want to see it for myself and hear the story the way they tell it and the arguments that they make for different things. But what stood out to me is the way Ken Ham told the Bible story. He was there live, gave a presentation for an hour, and I sat through it.
Did you almost become a coffee drinker?
Did you develop the spiritual fruit of patience during that time, or
Perseverance, at least.
Oh, there you go.
But he, unapologetically told the Bible story in terms of 7 C's. So 7 words that begin with C. So creation, corruption, catastrophe, the flood, confusion at the Tower of Babel, cross. Did I leave one out?
I don't know, but
No, but-
it's noteworthy that the jump there. I hope it was immediately evident for the listeners.
Creation. Did I leave out corruption? Creation,
No.
corruption, catastrophe, confusion, cross, consummation. I only have 6 C's there. They're going to have to do.
Yeah. Well, they need a 7th because that's like a Bible-y
but
God number.
regardless, 1C would have to cover a lot there in the middle from Babel to the cross,
Right. Exactly.
according to that schema.
So yeah, a notable gap in there that I think should really that should be like a major speed bump when people encounter that. To go, whoa, whoa, whoa! What about everything else we read in the Bible? Do we just unhitch ourselves from that because it's no longer relevant, or did God do that for a reason? And as Paul said in 1 Corinthians, these things were written for our instruction. Maybe there's something there that God wants us to learn, things he wants us to learn from, that inform our understanding of what it means to be the people of God.
Well, when you mention instruction, I think you see in churches that they say, well, we don't want to ignore it. We teach about Moses and we teach about Abraham and these things, but often those stories get turned into nice character pieces, like don't be like Israel, or be like Moses, who God used despite his,
Yeah.
And so instead of talking about how it fits into the story, they're really removed from the story, and just these are individual little lessons that we can learn.
A case study of some
Yeah,
sort.
and so it's not, and so their defense would possibly be that no, we still teach it, but the problem is they're not teaching the context of the story, the entire story, and so they're more illustrations of either creation, fall, or redemption, as opposed to something else that happens between fall and redemption.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the World Center view has its way of telling the Bible story, which is a significant improvement over the threefold story of creation, fall, redemption, and the 6 or 7. There's another C in there, and
It's Christ.
it is Christ. Okay,
Jesus is the answer for the world today.
and they have cross separate from Christ.
Yes, it's Christ, then cross, then consummation.
Okay, that's interesting. What Christ means apart from cross in that schema, since Christ means Messiah, which points to the history of Israel. That's not one of the C's. Yeah, good. So the World Center view, I think, tries to do better than that. And you can tell their story in terms of 5 periods in the Bible. So they begin with creation, that God created a very good world and called humans to look after it. Their second phase is that humans acted so sinfully that creation itself is broken. So this would parallel corruption in the Creation Museum's history. In response, God sets apart the descendants of Abraham to do something about the brokenness. And this is where they start trying to include the Old Testament story. But he has, or the World Center view has, the descendants of Abraham appointed to fix the world's brokenness. That's kind of implied way of telling the story. But Abraham's descendants, stage 3, fail to make the world a better place. They abandon the covenant. They fall into idolatry. They don't do any better. They soil the image of God. And so God sends Jesus to cast a vision for a better world. So Jesus comes and he casts his kingdom vision. He dies on the cross to conquer sin and death. And in so doing, he removes the barriers that prevent this world from being a better place. And step 4 is that God did not want Jesus to fix the world by himself, so he gathers Abraham's descendants, empowers them by his Spirit, enlarges their ranks to include all ethnic groups, and sends them into all nations to continue Jesus' work of making this world a better place. And so here you have the church, the descendants of Abraham, that the Spirit comes upon them, sends them out into mission. They convert the Gentiles. Gentiles become a part of the people of God and can kind of pick up where Abraham's descendants of old failed. Before Jesus, they failed to make the world better, even though God wanted them to. After Jesus, now they've got to succeed where Abraham's descendants failed. And the final stage is that Jesus will return someday and complete the task of making the world a better place.
So Israel is basically a failed project. Is that kind of what that view would say? That ultimately it was a colossal failure, and God redeems it by sending Jesus.
And Israel 2.0 in the church, is that
What do you mean by that?
the new Israel 2? So where Israel 1 failed, Israel 2, the new Israel, the church, which includes Gentiles, you said, now they're going to pick up the slack and finish and complete the parts where old Israel couldn't.
Yeah. And I think what sets apart this story is the implied mission. Like, because the world was corrupted through sin and the fall, all humanity just, when they try to live in this world, you lead to the kind of violence and sinfulness that led to the flood. So God wipes it clean, and now he's going to create a people to kind of get the world right, to fix it, to get it on the right track. And Israel failed in that task. And so the church kind of picks up to resume that task. And that's the telling of the story. And what's better about that is at least we have Israel and the church. What's not as clear in the Bible, and why we need to revisit the Bible story, is that at any way along the Bible story, God commissions his people to fix the broken world. That's what we're going to get into. When God sets apart Abraham, what does he ask him to do? When God gives them laws in Torah, what is the Torah designed to do in Israel? Right. When the prophets hold Israel accountable for not doing what God called them to do, what is it that they've fallen short in doing?
Yeah.
Is it falling short to make the world a better place, or is it something else?
Right.
And the same thing for the church. When Paul writes letters to the church to correct them for not being faithful in what they were supposed to do, is he rebuking them for failing to make the world a better place? Like, what is the mission that Jesus gives his followers? What is the standard that the New Testament letter writers hold churches accountable to? Mm-hmm. Is it the project of making the world a better place?
Right.
And I don't want to just answer those questions. I want to tell the story.
Right.
And pay attention, not just negatively, no, but what is the yes? What is the positive content that God has given his people?
Yeah, let the answers grow organically out of the story. Tell the story. Let that be the soil that bears fruit in the answers that we're looking for here.
So we begin in Genesis, and today, for the rest of the episode, we're just going to focus on creation. This is really the first stage of the Bible story. God creates this very good place.
Yeah. So in the beginning, that's where we're starting, right? We've got an Old Testament guy here in the person of Sam Long. So, Sam, are you going to...
I don't know what I'm going to do, but here we go.
I have no idea. So I think
I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about dinosaurs. I think that's really the solution to all our problems. If we can just figure out where the dinosaurs fit in the story, it would all make sense.
Because that's what the Bible's there to tell us, right?
Oh, yeah.
How human beings and dinosaurs related to one another.
Do you have any Creation Museum dinosaur anecdotes? Or?
Well, I can tell you that Ken Ham has dinosaurs on the ark.
Does he really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
But they're not the full-size ones. They're smaller ones.
They're baby dinosaurs.
They all didn't have to be Tyrannosaurus
I was
Rexes.
going to
Correct.
say, that'd go bad if you had T-Rexes and Velociraptors and stuff. We're talking
And
Jurassic
the like.
Park here.
That all, yeah. If we learn nothing else from Jurassic Park, it's that they don't play well together.
Exactly.
Okay.
Ken Ham has Jurassic Ark.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well played.
Yeah. So the story of the Bible opens with a God who creates the world, and over, it's this rhythm of each day. There's a different aspect that's brought into it, and it's affirmed that it is good. And like a liturgy, it kind of continues and builds until the final day where humanity is brought in, and it's called very good. And through all these things, God is the one perfectly in charge. No problem creating things. This sets it apart from a lot of ancient Near Eastern materials where there's a conflict involved, that the world is the result of something else, not necessarily intention, and that humanity has, in the ancient Near Eastern myths, typically a low image. They're not considered to be all that great.
Low status in the
a low status,
creation, yeah.
and typically just created to serve the deities, to serve the gods in some way. And then, of course, you contrast that with the Genesis account, where God creates, and it's almost as if humanity is the pinnacle of creation, and God has other intentions for humanity than just bringing him food, which is what we see in some other myths. And so that's chapter 1, which is, and obviously it's a very sweeping overview of it. But throughout we see that it's working together, and God has created a good, and in fact, a very good thing.
Yeah.
But we have some observations that I think we want to make about that.
Yeah, I think the first part is to recognize that our desire for a better place is not growing out of a defect in God's original creation. Mm-hmm. There is no conflict here. There is nothing out of place. Everything is in its place. Everything has its place. Everything has been provided for. So when the Bible story develops this yearning for a better place, I think it's helpful to note that it's not here in the beginning, that need.
In fact, could you say our yearning for a better place is an echo of what we once had as a race? That once upon a time we inhabited a place that's better than what we're in now, at least, and we're going, man, we know that that's a possibility. I can't help but wonder if a lot of the ancient Near Eastern myths about creation were based on just an observation that the world just seems to be aligned against us. And people come up with their myths to explain why this world just seems to be aligned against us in every way, that it's just such a fight just to stay alive, that their gods and their myths grow out of that. versus the creation story, which says, no, I'm going to reveal something that the world doesn't actually teach you, that this wasn't God's design, that he actually had something better in mind, and it was humanity that kind of ruined that.
Yeah, and it would have been an act of faith to recognize creation as good, as very good. That's the way God created it. Because their lived experience would have been quite the opposite. It would have been chaos, disorder, dysfunction. So when the Jews affirmed that, no, when God created this world, everything was good, everything was right. And we're going to get into next week, the fall, and how everything fell apart.
Right.
But it's initial affirmation of creation. That's very important here for the different views. Like a lot of versions of the heaven center view have a built-in negative view of life in this good creation.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. I can't help but wonder, and now I'm jumping way ahead in time, but I can't help but wonder when, after the Babylonian captivity, when you have all these Jewish congregations and communities scattered throughout the world, as they come into contact with the Gentiles, and they just start having conversations about their religion and their different creation stories. If a lot of Gentiles would hear that and go, "Man, that's just really weird," that their creation story is so radically different than those of the rest of the world, that for a lot of Gentiles, they're probably thinking it's weird. But there's going to be that handful that go, "Man, that's really weird, but in a cool way." That's so much better than what our stories tell us.
Yeah, and I think in churches we even see that a lot of churches will give lip service to, yes, there's an inherent goodness in humanity. There's an inherent goodness in creation, but all that's gone now.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure that it's all gone now. I don't know how you root out the goodness that God created the world with. There are definitely competing things we call sin out there that impinge on that. But if we take Genesis 1 seriously, God didn't create it to be bad. God created it to be good. Yeah. And it's only after sin enters in that anything happens. But again, we're talking about an inherent quality that I don't think disappears over time.
Yeah, in a way, the creation account, I think, calls upon us to see creation through a faith lens. Mm-hmm. Speaking only for myself, I've spent half a century walking this earth, and there's a part of me that's just really ready for Jesus to come back. When Paul says all creation has been subjected to futility, sometimes I just feel that really intensely. Like there's just a futility to everything. And I experience a lot of frustration living life out in this world. And just looking through that lens, I feel like probably the pagans did and how their myths came about. That I have to actually look through the lens of revelation rather than just what my eyes reveal to me. I have to listen to what God has said in the creation account to see this world differently, because my own sense perception is like, this place sucks. But Scripture, the vision of Scripture says, no, there's more to it.
Is it fair to say that, since creation starts out so good, and because sometimes in the prophets and in Revelation, when you hear about the kingdom and its fullness, you have language of Eden, that creation was perfect, that it was complete, lacking in nothing, and that the Bible story is really the story of how we got back to where we started? Would you say that's a fair characterization?
No. I think that's the way it's viewed often, that if we could just get back there, everything would be great again. But I think I would tackle this from a couple different perspectives. One is, I don't think that's what the literature is trying to do. I think, if anything, it's sort of idealizing something, this account, this creation, but saying there's still more to be done. Like, and this I think moves into the second point, is what is the overall charge for humanity? Is it to sit here in Eden and just enjoy life?
Sit here and don't screw it up.
Right.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I think that's how people view it, but they screwed it up. If they just sat there and enjoyed, everything would be great. But that's not...
Sitting on the beach, drinking fruity drinks, just enjoying
fruity
some
drinks.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not what it says. What's the charge for humanity?
Be
fruitful and multiply. The implication is there's not enough fruitfulness and there's not enough people yet.
Yeah.
That's not sit there and do nothing.
Right. And that's one commandment I can get on board with. So.
And to be honest, if we've completed any commandment God has given us, it's been multiplying.
Yeah, we've done that one really
6
well.
billion people can't be wrong, or whatever we're at now.
Yeah, right.
And the animals.
And the animals, right.
Yeah. So,
But
yeah,
I was just going to say that this is where you guys being far more your background in the Old Testament is much better than mine. One of the questions I have has to do with the command to have dominion over the earth and subdue it, as some translations say. That word subdue, what do you make of that? It sounds to me like God is saying something to the effect of, this creation is going to be a little bit unruly, and somebody's got to manage it. Somebody's got to sort of keep it under control. Like a garden that, trees need to be pruned back or something like that. If you don't take care of them, they get unruly, and so you have to subdue it. Is that right, or is that even a good translation? I mean, OT Hebrew experts here help me out with that.
I can't say the translation off the top of my head. Do you have that, Sam?
I'm getting it here in a second.
Actually, I have a Hebrew Bible over here that I haven't cracked.
Yeah,
open
but you don't know how to
in a long
read
time.
it.
I know. Actually, I can sound out the words. I just don't know what they mean.
Kavash, to subject, subdue, force, under, bring to bondage, among other times, among other translations, that is. It definitely has to bring to heal, is a translation. I think maybe the implication is things could get out of control on some level. That, it's hard to understand what they were thinking about. Because, again, you're looking at a perspective of they look around and they can definitely see things could get out of control.
Yeah.
So the original writers are looking around and saying, okay, I think God probably wants us to do this too, because, for example, if I leave my grape orchard, if I just leave that, it's going to go out of control and it's not going to be fruitful anymore.
Right.
There's pruning involved. There's things that take place. If I let animals just, well, for those of us who live in Michigan, there's a deer population problem that if we stop hunting, and by we I mean other people who shoot things, then we have deer crashing into vehicles at every turn.
That almost happened to me just this morning. I'm driving to work. In the middle of Lansing, 3 deer run across the road. I mean, in the middle of an industrial area. I know, the nerve of them.
Yeah. So I do think it presupposes that as we are fruitful and multiply, and as the animals are fruitful and multiply, and as the plants are fruitful and multiply, things are going to start to fill up. Mm-hmm. And, in the beginning, it's like open territory. Everyone can go and scatter. But as things start to fill up, there's not going to be unlimited territory to scatter in. People are going to have to start learning to get along with their neighbors. Mm-hmm. As things fill out,
and with creation, and like the animals. I mean, we had to learn to get along with the animals.
There's going to be territorial boundaries and respecting each other's boundaries. And there's something about humans that God has given us the ability to help maintain those boundaries in healthy ways. Yeah. So there's a potential for conflict whenever you have all species multiplying and spreading and filling. There's going to be opportunities for conflict. And humans have a role of managing that in a peaceful way, in an orderly way that respects the dignity of creation, respects the dignity of the animal kingdom, respects the dignity of humans in how we fill the earth. So I think it does, built into creation is the potential for conflict.
Okay. One other question, and I may be really reaching on this, I admit it, so you guys can shoot it down. I know you will.
Happy to.
Yeah, you won't hold back on that at all. But, when you think about the ancient myths, creation myths, the Babylonian myths, so many of them envision the gods basically bringing order to chaos. So many of those myths, you have this chaotic world that the gods step into and organize and bring order to and essentially subdue this chaotic world. Is it reaching too far to say that maybe what the creation story does to a degree is say, hey, human beings as God's delegates, as his image bearers, your job is to do what these other myths suggested that the gods do. Not saying that the earth is chaotic the way those myths portray the earth, but rather there is a disorderliness that can emerge that human beings are responsible for heading off, for keeping in check. In a way, are human beings, as God's delegates, put in the position of doing what other myths say the gods themselves did? Am I reaching too far on that? This idea of subduing the earth?
I mean, it's possible, but you're talking about some different things here. You're talking about the very created order, which is out of chaos, as opposed to sort of sustaining the world in the midst of chaos. I think it's a bit of a stretch, but I think it's intriguing to think about, because definitely Genesis 1 and 2 are meant to say, yeah, you didn't get it right, Babylonians. You didn't get it right, Egyptians.
Right.
And, you didn't get it right. That what you think went on is just not there. We have a God who creates a world and doesn't worry. There's no chaos for him to bring to bear.
Yeah, right.
He's completely in control. But I think the potential that comes from that is there may be difficult times that you have to navigate. Now, are we acting in the role of God in that time? You might suggest that. I don't know how far you could take it, though.
Well, I mean, he's created us in his image.
Okay.
And he has, as creator, presumably he has dominion over his creation. And he could have said, and I'll keep it from here on out.
Yep, I got this.
You guys just don't break anything. But he has chosen to give...
Don't throw balls in the house.
He's chosen to give humans responsibility in creation, authority in creation. He even uses royal language like subdue,
Yeah.
But without that having all... This would be a kind of subjection that belongs in a non-fallen world. A kind of authority that doesn't have violence and coercion and going against people's wills and natures in the process of subjecting them.
Right.
But there's this, this stewardship, to manage in a good way that's in the best interests of everyone. So I think God has given, maybe by giving that responsibility to us, maybe there's an implied that it's us and him in this world.
Yeah.
It's not the gods versus us in this world, or some other combination that you might find in the myths.
Yeah, it's far more collaborative. It's far more definitely harmonious. We're working together. We're a team. When you mentioned earlier, does the creation story suggest that the world was perfect? That's kind of where this came from in my thinking, that maybe it wasn't perfect, at least the way we define perfection. Like people just had nothing to do but pick fruit and hang out. They had work to do.
Multiply.
Good times. So yeah, maybe the world it was good, but not perfect in the sense that human beings had work to do to sort of maintain order, maintain whatever. I don't know. It's just
the quality and nature of the work is completely different between the different stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the work for humans in the myths is make sure the gods are happy by providing food for them.
Right, don't be too loud.
Don't be too loud, otherwise
exactly, and don't be too loud.
Yep.
But obviously in Genesis 1, that's not even close to what I mean, we're continuing what God has created, and we're working together, like you said, this partnership to continue to keep things apparently in a good state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so perfection language is deceiving. It's perfectly what God wanted it to be.
Yeah.
But it's still not complete yet. It's not finished. It was the perfect... I like to think of Genesis and the Garden of Eden as the perfect beginning. Mm-hmm. But there's so much potential that hasn't yet been realized.
Yeah.
And as we think about the grand arc of the Bible story, the story's ending, the coming of the kingdom in its fullness, is not really a return to unfulfilled potential.
Right.
But it's the fulfillment of all of creation's wonderful potential that was baked into it from the very beginning.
And I think this is where there gets the confusion, is because Eden is used as this, like some typology from Eden. That's the return to that. And so the assumption is, it'll be just like that at the end. Yeah. No, it won't be just like that, but it'll be some similarities, like this inherent goodness that we will refine and we will find again.
Eden-like,
yes,
but not Eden.
But not Eden.
Right.
But that's where I think there's been some confusion over time, is especially when you go from fall to the cross and the second coming, no, there's stuff in between. We're not just going right back to Eden. We're finally finding what God wanted from the beginning, starting with Eden.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more in the creation account, because I think this has a lot to do with how people see the role of the church or role of Israel. Humanity is given this responsibility to exercise dominion, to take care of the world. We've been kind of developing this. But at this point in the story, I think we should note that this giving of dominion to humanity is kind of a universal gift to all humans.
Right.
And this might stand out from other ways that ancient Near Eastern societies narrated their origins. That dominion is given to kings,
Yeah.
or dominion is given to lesser gods.
Right.
Dominion is certainly in the hands of the powerful, the male, those with a track record of showing domination over wider cultures.
Usually through physical acts of violence. I'm stronger than you. I can subdue you by inflicting pain upon you until you yield or until you die.
Well,
And since most people don't want to feel pain or die, they give in and do what the stronger person says.
even in the myths, that's what happens. The gods fight. The one god that wins, well, he becomes the chief god.
Right.
Like, that's how it works.
Yep.
So even within the myths and the gods themselves, this is happening. The conflict between who's the strongest rules.
So is it fair to say that in Egypt, dominion was given to Pharaoh?
Yeah.
That he is uniquely connected to the divine. He
Right.
bears the divine image, is divine in a sense.
Yeah. Revered as a god.
And the point of that is that, and the rest of his subjects are not.
That would be the implication. Sure.
Wouldn't be image bearers of the divine, do not exercise dominion, don't have a share in responsibility for creation. They receive their mandate through Pharaoh.
Right.
So any dominion they have is given to them by the image-bearing king.
Yeah.
And so Genesis, written to a culture that's had a lot of interaction with Egypt, is a drastic contrast.
Yeah. Something that's really interesting to me on that note, I was reviewing the Epic of Gilgamesh not long ago. For some reason, I was looking something up. But when the people are really suffering under Gilgamesh's, moral shortcomings, to say the least, one of the comments that's made in the text, the people they think that he's a poor king because the function of the king is to shepherd the people. Like, that's the exact word they use. The function of the king is to shepherd the people. And so, I think that when you see ancient societies and their view towards their kings, and often they are revered as gods, like in Egypt, and I think in Babylon, often that's the case as well. That they're looking for somebody to perform that function, and Gilgamesh is a poor king because he doesn't perform this shepherding function. Instead, he's oppressing the people and taking all the virgins and everything. And people have this sort of ideal of what they're looking for. They know what they want, and they see the king as the big man who's supposed to do that. Maybe the one who sort of steps in and kind of goes to bat for them in the gathering of the gods, so to speak. I don't know. Just something I want to toss in there when we're talking about ancient views of their kings and godhood status. I don't know how much it relates to what we're doing, but
Yeah, they're at the very least, if they're not considered a deity, they're considered empowered by the deity to bring certain things to bear. So you look at even the Code of Hammurabi. So in the prologue, Hammurabi basically says, Shamash has told me I'm in charge, and so we need to do these things in order to have an orderly society.
yeah.
And the implication is he may not be a god, but the gods have told him and empowered him that he's in charge, and he's the one who's going to bring order and justice into their world. And it's just him.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's the whole point of the prologue. It's a bit of propaganda saying, you need to listen to me, and me only, because the gods, or specifically this god, has emboldened me to do it.
Yeah.
And back to Genesis, that's not what's said.
Right.
We're all created in God's image. Humanity is created in God's image.
Male and female.
Male and
Male
female.
and female, yeah.
Yeah, and it's definitely a contrast to the ancient world, for sure. And together, we all are to do these things. Not one particular person who's been set apart, not a demigod, not a person we think is a god, but all of us, all of humanity.
Yeah.
And this is a foretaste of the vision of human thriving that we're going to see developed throughout the rest of the Bible.
Yeah.
Like in Torah, when God has given Israel instructions on how to order their society, power is spread out among the people. Mm-hmm. It's not concentrated in a king.
Right.
That's not God's design. It's something that people are going to ask for, and that anticipates future things that are going to happen in the story. But because these things have happened by the time the Israelites had Torah in their hand to read the creation account, they can't help but notice, oh, wow, God created things in such a way that every one of his people, every one of the human race bears God's image and has responsibility before God to be a good steward of his creation. It's very non-hierarchical in a way that casts a different vision for society. And so that's a theme we're going to have to just kind of maybe bookmark and see what happens with it and see where it goes. And one of the other themes is that one of the questions we're going to have to ask for next week is, what does the fall do to this? Does humankind lose God's image? That's a question we're going to have to ask, because in the way some people tell the Bible story, it's humanity lost God's image with sin. That's why God created Israel. Israel was to reflect God's image, and therefore Israel would uniquely be in charge of the world. And because Israel did bad, Jesus had to come to perfectly reflect God's image, to take control of the world, and then hand it over to the church so that we can be God's image bearers in the world. So for them, for certain ways of telling the Bible story, the image of God confers authority to rule the world, therefore authority to fix and straighten out the world. And that authority and ability is responsibility. And that kind of, this image and dominion language transferred from all humanity to specifically God's people is often used as the biblical authorization and responsibility for Christians to try to make the world a better place. So that's one thing we're going to look for as we go through. Does the fall talk about the image being lost? Does the calling of Abraham talk about the image being transferred? What else happens with the image of God? It's one of our questions.
Yeah. Sounds good. And I think, just a preview for next week when we talk about the fall, like, what does sin entering in the world do to the mission of being fruitful and multiplying? Like, the world doesn't have to be made better. It's already fine. It needs to be, it needs to be, doesn't need to be restored. It's at a good place. We just continue to work towards, being fruitful and multiplying. There's not this element of badness in it. So how is that going to change what we're supposed to do?
Yeah, what does the fall do?
Yeah.
And before we transition to that for next week, I do want to note that even in the creation account, we have God creating a tree of the knowledge of good and evil that humans are not supposed to eat from.
Yeah.
What does it mean that in God's very good creation, there is a tree that we may not touch or eat?
What does that mean?
Yeah. Why would God put that there? What is it saying that God creates something that's off limits for humans?
For me, and what I talk about in even Old Testament 1 class is there's this idea that there are certain things that, and again, this is being written from a perspective of people who live in a world that's fallen.
Right.
And they understand that there are things that we interact with that we shouldn't, whether we're not morally capable of handling them or we're not emotionally capable of handling them. Regardless, there's knowledge that we can receive that we're not mature enough to deal with. And I think that's just a symbol for that. It has very little to do with what fruit it is or why it's on a tree.
It's not an apple? You're killing me.
No, it's.
But I've got a bump in my throat that's...
It's a dragon. What do they call it? Dragon fruit? No. What's the spiky one?
Oh, yeah.
It's that one.
Yeah, okay.
And so for me, it's more of a symbol of that knowledge that humans come across, they're just not ready for. It's why I didn't let my kids watch rated R movies and still don't let them watch rated R movies. There's content in there they're not ready to handle.
Right.
So why would I let them just go, touch anything you want? So that's how I view it.
Yeah.
I think along that lines, maybe just a little bit different, just the idea that human beings have within them the capacity to make a choice, and it's a choice that doesn't align with God's. If we truly are free moral agents, we're not free moral agents if we don't have options other than God. If we don't have it within ourselves to go, okay, God, I know you said that, but I'm going to do it a different way. If we're kind of automatons that way, then we're really not choice makers. And I don't know that explains it in its fullness, but that's always been something that in me that has been part of my understanding. If the option isn't there to disobey, then is it really obedience?
Yeah. And one thing that stands out to me in this tree is that the thing they're not allowed to touch is something that's in the world that they've given dominion over. Like, they've been given dominion over the plants and the animals and presumably the trees. Like, this is part of the realm of their dominion. God takes something that is under their purview and says, but your dominion has limits. Your dominion over even the stuff I've given you has limits. You can't just do whatever you want with it. He doesn't like drop a mystical divine orb out of the sky and place it in the garden and say, don't touch that thing.
Right.
Something he hasn't given them dominion over. It's something he has given them dominion over. They can't do whatever they want with.
Yeah, good point.
I think there's significance to that. And it just proves, I think, or suggests that our dominion isn't a blank check.
Yeah.
There is God. Our dominion is derivative from God, and we are answerable to Him with how we are a steward of what He's given us, and He's allowed to set rules to how we exercise our dominion. And this gets to what Sam is talking about. Until He says we can do something, we shouldn't do something.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean He's never going to allow us to, but our dominion has limitations, and only God has full sovereignty over His creation.
Amen.
So, all right. So far, we're only into the very beginning of the Bible story, and we've established that God created a world that was good, didn't have defects built into it. It had potential waiting to be realized. But so far in the Bible story, God's people as such don't exist. We just have the human race, the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom. Creation exists. We don't have a set-apart people yet. So we don't have any instructions given to set-apart people.
Yep, an undifferentiated humanity.
Yeah. And we also have what are the conditions in which God's set-apart people are later going to find themselves. In a good creation in which God has given dominion to all humans and the commission to be fruitful and multiply to all humans. That's the context in which God's people are going to exist. And we're going to see how that context radically changes with the fall in our next episode.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. It's always a pleasure to have you here listening to our conversation. Join us next time for the After Class podcast, because
the best conversations happen
after class.